You're listening to Transcaster Radio, a podcast about trans life and all that goes along with it. You can listen to the show anywhere you enjoy podcasts, and we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review. It helps us reach more people, and we greatly appreciate it. Now, here's your host, Caden Taylor.
Is there something interfering with your happiness or is preventing you from achieving your goals? This was the problem for me, and I needed help to change it. PrideCounseling.com will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. I did it in less than 5 minutes. You can start communicating with your therapist in less than 24 hours. It's not a crisis line or self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, and trust me, I have. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, and you can even do chat sessions, which will keep you from ever having to go into an uncomfortable waiting room again. You can change counselors at any time. I actually had to do that. It was real simple and easy, and it's free. So visit pridecounseling.com/transcaster and join myself and over 500,000 people who are taking charge of their mental health. For listeners of Transcaster Radio, they are doing a special offer. You can get 10% off your first month. Just go to the link, pridecounseling.com/transcaster. Hey Transcasters, welcome to this week's episode of Transcaster Radio. I'm your host, Caden Taylor. I've got an awesome guest for you today. I'm going to go ahead and let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa Nichols. I am the proud mama bear of a 10-year-old trans kid. And I am a fierce advocate and ally to the trans community. And I have a fundraising project called the Trans Love Project, where I raise funds for LGBT organizations.
That's awesome. I'm so excited that you're here today so that we can chat about all that you do and your story.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I want to start by talking about when your son, I don't want to mention his name if you're not okay with that, protect his identity. So I want to talk about when he came to you and first said, "Hey, Mom, I think I'm trans." Like, tell us that story and how you felt when that happened.
Sure. So for him, because he came out so young, it was not as cut and dry, I think, as some other conversations that trans kids have with their parents. He started showing a pretty fierce rejection to everything we label as female gendered from such a young age. I mean, he was 2 to 3 years old when he was really showing signs of just liking everything in the boy, quote unquote, sector and things like that. So it was kind of a combination of discussions and observations. And as a parent, I really went through, I think a lot of us of parents of trans kids go through the phases of, well, he must be a tomboy, or, maybe he'll be a lesbian. And, we have this whole process for ourselves, but it wasn't until he was about 6 that he really started to begin having the language. And even then we kind of needed help from a medical professional to help us both understand the language. So it was a combination, like I said, with a medical professional that kind of helped us to really identify what was going on. And for me, it was a reaction of mostly fear in the beginning because of all the hate that we hear about towards the trans community. And it was just this reaction of like, oh my gosh, I went way too big with what this was going to look like. I went way too big, just imagining all the worst. So it took me a little while to really understand it myself and research and reach out to other parents of trans kids, especially online. Thank goodness for the internet in this day and age.
Yeah.
So it was a process. I mean, it was really a process in the beginning of just understanding. So there wasn't any one moment. There were many moments of impact, but all good and all very beneficial, and just led me to this beautiful education. But there were some ups and downs in the beginning, just because it was really a lack of understanding for me. But for him, it was just this magic of changing his name and his pronouns. And it was magic. He went from a very sad, shy, self-harming child to one that was magnificent and happy and well-adjusted and sure of himself and confident. So for me, that's all that mattered, was that he was happy.
Yeah, that makes me so happy, because I run into a lot of people who they have parents like mine. Now, my father is gone, and he has been gone since before I transitioned, but I basically, other than my grandfather, have lost all my blood family. And it was due to being trans. And I didn't come out until I was 30. And I always knew something was different, but I just didn't have a very supportive family. So it makes me happy when I hear younger trans people come out and they have supportive families. I know I have a trans brother-in-law, and he's only 15. And although his mom is okay with me, she is not okay with him being trans, and she's not supportive to him. I have known him since he was about 11, and at that time he already said that, he identified as a boy. And I tried to talk her into, putting him on hormone blockers and things like that, because he had just started, I think, or was about to just start, female puberty.
Mm-hmm.
And his mom just wouldn't allow it. So it hurts, because she doesn't, and now he's 15. So, he's growing a chest, and, things are happening that he is causing him severe dysphoria. And he's such a sad kid. He stays in his bedroom all the time. He's depressed. I don't know if he self-harms, because he's always covered up. He always he's in full clothing. And so it makes me happy to hear when there are supportive parents out there for the trans youth, because I think it's so important, because the stats show that the youth are more likely to self-harm or commit suicide if they don't have a loving and supporting family presence.
And that's just the thing, right? Like, first and foremost, I'm so sorry that you experienced that type of rejection. And I know, just because I know you, and I know your fiance, and I know that you've found a chosen family, which, to me, chosen family, because I've had to do the same thing. Dylan and I have had to create our own chosen family. We lost a lot of friends and family. But I can't identify with how that feels as a child to be rejected. And so I'm so sorry that was your reality. And it makes me so sad. I will never understand that. And for your brother-in-law as well, it's very sad to me. And that's why I'm such a visible public advocate and ally and activist, because I hope to reach these parents that, I mean, listen, I was one of those parents in the beginning. I didn't get any of this. I didn't have a liberal household. I was raised in a conservative Republican household. I was raised with privilege. I was raised with a huge lack of diversity. I mean, I didn't have, it makes me laugh when people say that this is some sort of a liberal agenda. I don't even know what that means. So I have a hard time when I was one of those parents that didn't understand this. But when you hear these statistics that you just mentioned, when you see the hurt, when you see your child hurting, how can you not do everything in your power to learn and educate yourself? That's something that that's one reason why I'm here. That's one reason why I'm an advocate. That's one reason why I'm a voice, because if I can reach other parents like yours and, like your in-laws, if I can reach those parents and say, listen, just listen to your child, just listen. I mean, it's not that hard. And this journey, I think for so many of us as parents, we're scared of what all of this means. And so we don't lean into it when we should. We have to lean into who our children are instead of who we design them to be in this manufactured fantasy of ours. It's not that hard. This journey is beautiful if you allow it to be. So I'm sorry that was your reality, but just know, obviously there are parents that are fighting to change the narrative.
Yeah. And there are. There are a lot of people out there that, have trans children or maybe trans themselves that are, fighting for that. And I do see that out in our community. And it's just hard, when like I've talked about it recently that my grandma was my best friend growing up. I was raised a lot of my life by my grandma, and she's just has never been able to accept it in the last 4 years. And it's gotten to the point now where I do talk to my grandpa because he is accepting of me, but I just don't talk to her because it was causing too much hurt and heartache on my end. And it's very hard for me to not understand why you were my, guardian angel and a lot of, when I was a child. And because I'm finally choosing to live my life the way I've always seen myself, you're not very accepting. And it makes me question why parents do that. She's not technically my mom. She's my grandma, but she was like my mom growing up. And it's hard to understand when I do see people like you and your son and how, warm and welcoming you are with him. And although I'm sure you struggled in the beginning, and I expected that, especially, with the older generation, I expect that. But just to, you went and learned and educated yourself where like my grandma has not done that, even if I have provided her the resources to learn about it. I think like you stated, the first thing she was concerned with was how society would see me. But I don't think she ever realized, how she sees me. And some of the things that she has said and some of the things I've heard other trans folks and trans youth say that their family members have said just breaks my heart.
No, it's awful. It's truly, it's heartbreaking. And I think that my message is we have to learn how to love without limits or boundaries. And, that applies intersectionally. I mean, that we have to learn. And the only way we do that is from others that have lived the experience that we have not. I mean, and unfortunately, it took me a long time just in life to become of this mindset. I was very myopic. I was very focal on what I knew as reality, like most of us are, and or most of us with privilege, I should say. We grow up in this myopic, very small, very self-centered, egotistical mindset, and we don't open our minds to what others live and how and what their lived experience, and we choose not to listen, and that's something that's, I don't want to say a skill, but it's something that we really have to focus on within ourselves. And with your grandma, I don't accept any excuse for not coming to terms with an education. I don't think there's any excuse. I don't care if it's generational. I have drawn a hard line. Like if my parents who are close, my dad's 70, my mom's 67, if they're of the baby boomer generation, if they could do it and they really had to learn about what this meant too, anyone could do it. So, I don't allow excuses in my life. And I've drawn a hard line in our lives for Dylan and myself that you're either marching next to us on this journey or you're not in our lives. And of course, I'll be cordial to you if you'll be cordial to me, but I've drawn a hard line in terms of who we let into our smaller circle. And it makes me sad to hear that you had such a close relationship with someone like a grandparent who hasn't adopted that frame of mind. And, people often message me and ask me, how do I help shift that mindset, like what you're describing of your grandma? Like, how do I help shift that? And I wish I had the answer. I think that there are certain types of mindsets that unfortunately might not ever change. And that's on them, that they have to deal with whatever comes with that, whatever guilt comes with that, with what they're missing out on. They have to reconcile that. And that's a bigger piece for them to reconcile than it is for us to draw a hard boundary and walk away. So I believe that's my belief.
I agree. How did your parents, when you first came to them and told them about your son, how did they react to it? I mean, obviously they're very accepting now, but they are from the baby boomer generation, and they might have not completely understood it. So how did they take it?
Yeah, no, it was a process for the whole family. I mean, I've heard from many people that, when your kid or family member transitions, everyone goes through their own transition, which is true to a certain extent. And for them, it was definitely that. And for them, they kind of adopted the same mind frame as I did, is here's this beautiful, at that time, 8-year-old child who is hurting, this beautiful child that, we loved and nurtured from birth. And we're looking at this child and we're watching him hurt. And it was kind of that, whatever we need to do to make this child smile, that's what we're doing. And it could have been whatever the answer is, that's what we were going to do. So for them, a piece of it was that they had a hard time. My mom especially had a really hard time. She helped me choose his birth name, and there was a namesake there. And so, they went on their own journey. And honestly, I answered this question the other day when I gave a talk, and the answer was, as silly as it sounds, the documentary Gender Revolution with Katie Couric, which I believe was filmed in 2015, 2016. That piece, even though there's problematic segments of that, that piece really, for them, for generationally, it really tied so much together for them. And the way that both my parents and myself were very black and white thinkers, in terms of, we're very scientific. We want facts. We want, we want proof. And I think that way about many things in my life. And so for them, that Gender Revolution provided them with that more black and white, like, this is what it is. This is how we need to open our minds to what's happening. And so for whatever reason, that resonated with them. There were even at the time, even a couple of years ago, there were very few resources, even than what we're seeing today. So there were hardly any books on the shelves to talk about this. There was hardly anything else that I could grasp onto to say, here, read this, or here, listen to this story, or, there wasn't as much as I would have liked to have. But that, for them, that was what started their journey into acceptance and understanding. And ultimately, really just saying, oh, this totally makes sense. And so, and we share resources all the time. Like my mom, since then, I send every article, every story, every personal journey, her and I share back and forth with, and she's become Dylan's biggest supporter. So next to me. So it's been amazing to see that with an older generational couple.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, because that would have been a concern of mine, would be going to, you, of course, he's your son, but, you never know how other people, and being that you were close to your mom and dad, it would be a scary thing. Was your son at all worried about how other people would see him as he transitioned?
I'm so sorry that my dog's
No,
barking.
it's okay. You might hear mine too, but
Oh
no
my gosh,
worries.
I'm so sorry. Um, you know what? For Dylan, what was really cool about Dylan's transition is that, first of all, he was 8 when he came out. And the coolest thing about 8-year-olds is they don't overthink anything, and most 8-year-olds. And so for him, when he had permission from me as his mom, which again, I hate that word permission, but that's what it boiled down to when you're 8.
Yeah.
But when he had permission to be himself, and he had from not only his mom but his extended family, and a therapist was involved, and the more he understood himself, he really he jumped in front of me and ran with it. Like as soon as we sat down in his counseling session, and his counselor said, Dylan has chosen a new name, and his name is Dylan, and we're going to switch to pronouns he, him. And, she's kind of delivering this information to me. And Dylan and I unpacked that after the session. And then I said, yeah, let's try this. And, whatever you want to do, and let's do this. He jumped in front of me and started telling all of his friends and all of the neighbors. And, before I could even help him with the conversation, he just kind of ran with it. And so all of a sudden I'm getting texts from neighbors saying, what's going on? And, so I had a lot of backpedaling in terms of explaining to do, which was fine, because all I cared about is that he was happy. And so
Yeah.
he was not overly concerned, because he didn't realize the layers, because that's the beauty of kids. They don't realize the layers behind any of this. He didn't realize the hate that trans folks encounter. He didn't realize any of it. Because kids don't think that way. And so that was the beauty of his age, and having age on his side was phenomenal. And it wasn't until probably about, I would say, a year after his social transition that he realized, like, oh, people don't understand this, because some kids kind of pushed back at school and said, well, I don't understand, but you're not a boy, but you're not, and they really kind of started pressing him. So he did then start to realize about a year later that there were people that didn't understand this journey. But in the beginning, he didn't even know that existed. And large and in part, his friends were just shrugged their shoulders and said, okay, cool, I'll call you Dylan, I'll use he, him. And he was very understanding if someone messed up or screwed up and on pronouns or the name, but he would just gently correct them. And I frankly gave him permission in the beginning that if someone intentionally misgendered or used his birth name, to ignore them, because that's not your name and those aren't your pronouns. And if it was intentional, I gave him permission, just ignore them, even if it's a teacher. And that was the conversation that I nurtured with him. And that's what he did. And so it worked for him.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
How was the school with him?
School was a journey. I was very fortunate to be met with administrators that were very progressive, which unfortunately is not the case in our area of Florida, for the most part. So for us, we were in the right place at the right time with the right administrators. Thankfully, the principal of his school at the time was on an LGBTQ plus task force that were starting to cultivate the inclusive guidelines that now exist for our district. And so she sat on that task force. And so when I came to her and I sat with her, and I had no idea what resources I had. I didn't know our rights, but I knew what I was going to enforce myself. And that was, this is what's going to happen. You're going to call him Dylan, and you're going to use he, him pronouns. And if you don't, I'm pulling him out of this district. That was my message. I drew a hard line. I was not willing to compromise with bathrooms or anything. And so I printed out a gender support plan from genderspectrum.org. I pushed it across the table to her and I said, this is what we're doing. And her and I cried together. And because she just was like, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of Dylan. This is amazing. So we were in the right place at the right time with the right administrators. And then that was at the end of 3rd grade for Dylan. And that principal parlayed into another position at another school. And the incoming principal came in and said, what can I do? How do I do this? where can I get my staff trained? How do I make this work for all kids? And so we were lucky, and I spoke at school board meetings to get those inclusive guidelines pushed out for the rest of the district, which they did in October of 2018, so a year ago now. But again, it's not always that easy with different administrators at different schools, and they're still doing it on a per case basis, which I really detest. But for us, it was not a very difficult conversation. We had to do a lot of educating. Thankfully, at the time, also Youth Executive Director Nathan Broomer did a lot of great ally training, and he was invited in at the time to do ally training for Dylan's school, and other administrators in schools throughout the district did it as well. But that conversation has now kind of simmered, and it's kind of being ignored again, and it's not as much as a priority to other schools, which is a huge concern of mine because other kids at other schools are suffering.
Yeah.
So, but for us, it was not as difficult as it could have been. It was pretty actually perfect. If I had to design a perfect conversation, Venice Elementary provided us with that.
Is he still in elementary school?
He is. He's in his last year of elementary school. So he's in fifth grade. He's having a phenomenal social year. Academically, he uses school as a social experiment, which he takes after me in that realm. But he's moving on next year, and I don't know what that's going to look like. So that anxiety is starting to build for me, that I'm going to have to have these conversations and be ready for battle. I'm always ready for battle in this journey for him. And so I don't know what that's going to look like next year, but he has legally changed his name and gender marker. So that makes it a little bit easier in terms of the legal things of it. But it still has to be a conversation for safety. So it's a balance for sure with school.
Yeah. Did anything change for you for being, going from having Dylan as assigned female at birth to being your son as far as being his mom?
No, and I think about this a lot, and it's something that I really want to write about. I write a lot. I do have a blog that I'm not very great with. It's vanessaleenick.com, and then I'm very visible on social media, but I write a lot, and sometimes I overshare, and I'm very vulnerable in my writing. But this is something that I want to write about, and I just can't articulate it the way that I want to. But people ask me that often. Like I went from parenting a quote unquote female, but he's always been my boy. Like, that's the thing, is like, for me, he's always been my boy. So for me, there was no change in parenting. And I detest all these things online that I see in these memes about, make sure to teach your boys to, open door.
That drives me nuts.
Oh my gosh, it makes me crazy because no, for me, parenting a girl, a boy, non-binary, it's all the same. You teach them consent. You teach them to be kind. You teach them courtesy. You teach them as much empathy as you possibly can teach them. A lot of it is simply genetics, how they turn out. But for me, it's not been a shift for me. I've always just parented him, and like I said, from the age of 2, his gender was quite clear. And so no, nothing's changed for me in terms of the way that I parent. Things have certainly changed, for me in other ways, as far as my circle of friends and our family and all those outside forces. But for me as a parent, no, nothing's changed.
That's good to hear. Yeah. And I like the fact that you raise your child not, to stereotypical female or male things. And it sounds like you always have, even when he was assigned female at birth. So,
yeah.
In your advocacy work, I know that as this podcast grows, I get more of it, but you deal with a lot of ignorant people and you get a lot of hate mail. How have you dealt with that since your advocacy work has gotten out there?
So I think that's a great question, and it's super important because I think that people don't realize the layers that go along with being a public figure. And, Kaden, thank you for your visibility, because you're making a difference for Dylan and for trans youth and for the next generation, and doing this podcast and being visible. Being visible is so important, and being visible is far more important than the hate that comes with it. I guess that's my answer, so yes, I have been attacked, and by local people, by people in Dylan's school, by school board members. I've been attacked by people I know, a lot of people that I don't know, but I've been sent hate mail to my house. So yes, there's a balance, but what I'll say is I got really friendly with the ban from page button on my public Facebook page and the delete button. And people have accused me of deleting things because I can't handle it, which is the exact opposite. I can handle anything. It's that it just doesn't need to be read or said by other people. It just doesn't. It doesn't need to exist in my world. When I'm a public advocate, I'm trying to grow a community of affirming folks. I'm not trying to pander to people that don't get this. So as soon as I start receiving that hate, I read it, I screenshot it in some cases if I feel at all threatened, especially if it's a local person. And then I take a break. Like sometimes I have to remove myself from social media for a few days, or I just schedule posts instead of actually interacting with the posts. I schedule them online or whatever. I step away from the computer and I just look within my four walls, and like, my kid's happy, I'm safe, he's safe. Keeping him safe has been something that I think about every single day, because people think I'm overexposing him. Even some of my friends have been hard on me for that. But again, I look at it as visibility, and I tell Dylan all the time, and I ask his permission for everything that I post that's personal to him. And every story I share, every panel discussion I do, every podcast interview I do, I'm very cognizant of his safety and what he wants me to put out there, what he doesn't. And I ask his permission. And I worry about his safety every day. I think about deleting all of social media every day for that reason. But it's when I get messages from youth that are struggling. I get messages from kids as young as 12 that are contemplating suicide. I get messages of kids that are 14, 15, 16 that have been kicked out of their houses and they're living at friends' houses or their uncle's house, or, they're being beaten in some cases, or, I've heard it all from youth that need validation. And that's why I remain a public advocate. And so I keep those messages at the top of my brain file and say, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm doing it. With every message like that I get from a youth that's hurting, I far more prioritize that over the hate. The hate, to me, I can let it go. Being called a child abuser and all the things that come along with that, or having Munchausen's by proxy syndrome. I get accused of all these different things, as most parents of trans kids do. I'm able to drown that out for the greater good.
Do you ever respond to them?
Depending on if I'm feeling feisty, sometimes I do. I do. Like sometimes I will troll them back because that's how I feel, right? Like they're trolling me, I troll them right back, and I challenge them if I think that there's a movable middle in their message. Because sometimes I'll get these messages of, I respect that you love your child, but, and so if there's some kind of softness to their message, and if there's a movable middle, I will for sure start throwing resources at them, or I'll try my best to educate them if I think that they're just misinformed. Because the biggest misinformation is that us as parents of trans kids that are young, that are prepubescent, are filling our kids with hormones and puberty blockers at the age of 5. And that is the biggest myth that exists about parents of trans kids. And it's so dangerous. We have a big situation going on right now in Texas where, there's a divorced couple, and the mom is affirming of her trans daughter and the dad is not. And it has gone viral, and it has made its way around the world that this mother is medically mutilating her child. And I have friends that know this mother very well. This is just a case like me. that where this mother is just an affirming mom, and all she's doing is loving her kid and following her kid's lead, and the dad is not only financially profiting off of this, but also there's a political gain here now, because the Republicans and the right wing is really using this to really discuss this anti-trans rhetoric. And so, I have a really hard time with how we're exposed as parents of trans kids, and that we're mutilating our kids. And people believe that, and they truly do, even if they're not bigoted, they believe what they're reading. And that's the danger. So if I think that there's a movable middle, I'll try to educate them.
Yeah. Will you talk a little bit about hormone blockers? Because I think that not everybody completely understands them.
Yep.
And I think that's where my soon to be mother-in-law is at, is she doesn't understand them. She thinks that they're going to, hurt her child in some way. And so do you mind talking about those a little?
Yeah. No, I think it's important. Yeah. No, I had to do a lot of research. So just a little bit of background on myself. I am not a medication person. I won't even take an ibuprofen if I have a headache. For myself, and I am pro medication for ailments for other people. Medication and I have never gotten along. Never. I tried birth control when I was young for various reasons, for various reproductive reasons. I tried birth control. It didn't work for me for various reasons. It made me very sick. I had migraines. I had to try antidepressants at one point in my life, and those made me very sick, and they didn't work for me. I've had to try anti-anxiety medication. So medication and my chemistry just have never gotten along. So know that as a baseline of this conversation, that
Okay.
I am for sure, like, medication and me is a research project, because I want to know what I'm putting into my body. And so obviously for my kid, when this came up, my child is fully vaccinated. Obviously I believe in the vaccine movement, all of those good things. But when this came up, and when I started to understand this journey, and we sought out a pediatric endocrinologist as part of our medical team for Dylan, he explained to me how this works, because thankfully he was versed in dealing with trans kids and what their needs are. And he explained to me what we look for with trans kids. And obviously every trans kid's journey is different. Some don't involve any medical intervention at all. But for Dylan, it really started to create some dysphoria that he started with female puberty. He is now 10. So his endocrinologist, even though he's been with an endocrinologist for 2 years, his endocrinologist didn't do any blood work of any kind. All we were doing was monitoring symptoms. And then when he turned 10, he started feeling really uncomfortable with some of his growth. And so they tested his blood, and he was indeed in Tanner stage 2 puberty. That has to be a baseline for any kind of medical discussion for puberty blockers. And so for Dylan, we're in that beginning stage of discussing puberty blockers. And puberty blockers are well researched. They've been around since the 80s. They were developed for prepubescent, precocious puberty. So for some that were going through puberty as young as 5, 6 years old, that's why they were designed. I know that they're used off-label for other things like cancer treatments and things like that. And I can't speak to the efficacy of that. But in terms of for our trans kids, it really is just a pause button. There's no hormones involved. It literally does nothing but allows for more time for our kids' development in terms of emotional development. And it really allows them some time. And for Dylan, it's life-saving. It's necessary, and they're proven effective and safe, and they have very little side effects. They have been studied. There was a 2014 study, and I know that they're being studied on a longer term basis with trans kids right now as well. But there's very few side effects, and all they do is suppress, and there's no danger to them at all, and they're vital to our trans kids' emotional well-being.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know not a lot of people know about puberty blockers, so I wanted to get your. I didn't have them. I was
Yes.
30 before I started transitioning, so I did not have them. But I will say that I have read a lot about them, and I wish I would have had them when I was a little kid and could have identified as trans at that time. So I think they're really important if your child is trans, if they want to use them.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, you might have a trans child that does not want to use any kind of medical intervention for their transition. So I think it's a combination between, the parent talking to the child and the child talking to the parent to determine what's the best case scenario for that child. And I
Yes.
know
And
that certain kids, just like certain adults, I have some friends that they can't be on hormones because of, other reasons why,
yes.
other medical reasons why. So,
Yes. Yes. And that's a great point. And I think the other point to make too for trans kids that are just entering into puberty, not only does standard stage 2 need to be established and basically a baseline via blood work, but also this isn't a decision. We don't go in as parents of trans kids or trans kids. We don't go into our medical professionals' offices demanding these things. And I think that's a huge misnomer that we go in demanding puberty blockers, or we go in demanding when they're teenagers that we demand hormones and testosterone and estrogen and HRT. That's not the case. There's a whole process, generally speaking. There's a whole process of mental health involvement and evaluating and lots of discussion. I mean, Dylan and I have a lot of healthy discussions about body image and how, growth makes us feel, and what puberty looks like. What does that mean? And a lot of discussions. And because our schools aren't doing us any favors with leaving these conversations out about our LGBT youth. So a lot of that lands on our shoulders of parents of trans kids to have this educational seminar with them, basically about what this is and what does this look like, what is a period, what is breast development, so we're having these conversations, and then we do leave it up to our kids. How do you feel, Dylan? How is this making you feel? So there's a lot of discussion, a lot of thought that goes into these big decisions. They're big medical decisions. They're personal to every single individual, whether they're trans or not, obviously, but definitely for our trans kids, it's a very personal journey. So I think that that's very important, that none of these decisions are made overnight. So I think that's the other thing, is that I get accused. I think a lot of parents of trans kids get accused all the time of that, our kids wake up one morning and say, you know what? I'm trans and this is what we're going to do today. And, that it's so far from the truth. It's so nonsensical that we would make these rash decisions.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, as an adult trans person, I didn't make rash decisions. So,
Right.
I
Right.
mean, I don't think, I think that, when people think like that, I try to go back and say, well, in your own medical, circumstances, do you make rash decisions? I just don't think
Exactly.
we do. And so I don't know where they get this idea that we just automatically go rush this, it's a big decision, I
It
mean,
is.
medically transitioning is a big decision, whether or not you're 10 years old or you're 50 years old. It's still a big decision. And
Yes.
the only difference between being 10 and 50 is that at 10, you're going through your parent, with the help with their guidance, because you might not completely understand it all. So, but it's still a big decision to, make, go forward with whatever it is that you think is best case scenario for you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just following their lead in terms of, and that's the other piece of that conversation is, well, when you say follow their lead, you're letting them make decisions. No, we're not. As parents of young trans kids, we are not letting them make the decision. We are following their emotional health needs. We're following their physical health needs. Just like you would for any other reason when you have a child. I mean, this is, and it's funny to me that I have all these friends that this might be a poor analogy, but I have all these friends that allow their kids to play tackle football, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And they're out there every Saturday, literally, risking concussions that can have life altering, even fatal consequences for the rest of their lives. And these are the same parents that are yelling at me that I'm pumping my kid full of hormones. So to me, there's such an irony and a hypocrisy that we as parents do. We judge other parents for everything, from breastfeeding to co-sleeping to, everything. We always are looking for a reason to judge other parents. And frankly, I think it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy that we're not just allowing parents to do what's best for their kids, period. And, and so I don't see this as any other thing. You want to let your kid play football and risk their possibly their lives. Great. That's your choice. Do that and let me raise my kid. It's to me, it's just, it's parenting, and we all do it in a personal journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have any children except ones that have 4 legs and bark or meow at me. But I agree. I do agree with you. So I want to talk about the Trans Love Project and how you decided to form that, and what you're doing with it.
Yeah, so the Trans Love Project was a really great concept. So back in February of this year, of 2019, I was actually at a human rights campaign conference called Time to Thrive. And it's to uplift the voices of LGBT youth. There's educators there, parents there, allies there, LGBT youth. And it was just a really great conference. It was the first of that kind that I had attended since my start in advocacy. And it just so happened that while I was there at that conference that Saturday, on Saturday Night Live, Don Cheadle was the host. And he just so happened to wear a shirt during one of the transitions, like he was introducing the band or something, and he wore a shirt that said "Protect Trans Kids," and it went viral, especially within circles of parents of trans kids. And another mama bear that I'm friends with on Facebook had posted this really awesome blurb about how important it was that Don Cheadle showed his allyship and why it was so important to us, especially of parents of trans kids. And she had said, like, gosh, I wonder where we can get one of these shirts where we're giving back to LGBT organizations. And her and I were both like messaging, and we were Googling and trying to find an organization where we could buy these shirts of some sort, allyship shirts that we could then give back to LGBT organizations. And we couldn't find any. So I said, I'll make one. And like, how can we do this? And I've never done anything like that before. And so I said, well, it can't be that difficult. And so I started doing some research. So I very quickly, within about 4 hours, had a website up and going with an e-commerce site. And I had come in contact with this beautiful trans woman artist named Shayna Carroll. And she is on Facebook at I believe Shayna Carroll Art is now her new Facebook page, or 40 Comics is also her Facebook page. And she's a phenomenal artist. And so she had offered to do some designs for us. And so she had designed some shirts, and we just threw those designs up there, ordered some shirts, and within the first 2 days we had 400 shirts ordered. And so we were able to give back since the onset, since February of 2019. We have donated around $4,000 back into small LGBT organizations. And we look for the grassroots organizations that are doing the work in the communities. We're looking for those smaller organizations that really benefit from a donation of, $500, $700, $1,000 that, can really make a lot of good things happen with a donation like that. And so we asked for applicants. And so every few months we rotate the recipient of the donations from the shirt sales, and we donate all proceeds back into those organizations. So we don't take a profit. We just cover our costs. And I'm going to announce the next recipient for that's going to start December 15th. So I'm going to announce the next recipient around December 1st. And we're always looking for artists to submit their artwork so we can come out with new products. And we don't really want to recycle the designs. We want new designs and new products as much as possible, as much as funds allow us to do that. Right now, we just donated our last recipient August 1st. And so these past couple of months have been about any sales have been going to replenish product. And then so we'll announce the new one as of December 15th. And it's been phenomenal. It's been such a fun project. I'm actually tabling a week from today at Venice Pride, so if anyone's listening that's local to Venice, Florida, we have Venice Pride. It's the transloveproject.com online, which is where you can buy the shirts. The Trans Love Project on Facebook, and then Trans Love Project on Instagram. We're all over social media. And trying to grow it as much as we can. We're always looking for donors to the project. We are not a nonprofit. We are a fundraising project. So we're always looking for donors to the project so we can come out with more innovative items and new designs, because since that onset, since Don Cheadle made that statement, which is fabulous, there's been a lot of competition. Amazon threw a bunch of designs out there, and we have a lot of competition that are for profit. And I've seen some similar fundraising projects pop up too ever since, which I think is phenomenal. So the more we give back into the community, the better.
Yeah. I think it's awesome.
Yeah,
when you started it, I was like, oh, this is just, I remember that I did not watch Saturday Night Live, but of course, the following day you see it all over everywhere.
Yes.
And,
yes.
I remember seeing that and I was like, oh, this is awesome. Being at Saturday Night Live and such a big platform that a lot of people watch. I thought that was an awesome. And I really do love, I didn't realize it was just a fundraising project. For some reason, I thought that you had turned it into a nonprofit.
Yeah, no, it's just it's a fundraising project because, we don't have board members. It's just myself. Yeah. The original donor to get the project kickstarted, her name's Jennifer Dane, and she's an awesome ally. And I met her at that Human Rights Campaign event that I was at. She just so happened to be in the room when I was trying to brainstorm of how to do this. And she introduced herself to me, and we just kind of became fast friends. And she's like, I want to help. And she literally bought the first lot of shirts that we sold. And so she donated the original funds for it. And so yes, someday I hope to turn it into a nonprofit somehow. The tricky part is when you turn it into a nonprofit is then giving back to other nonprofits. It gets very technical. So I just kept it as a fundraising project for now. I have visions to grow it, of course. Like I really want to market and more and do what I can and bring on a social media manager and all of those things. But we're always looking for donors to make that happen. So the project could grow and grow. And what I'd like to see is, instead of writing $500 or $700 checks, I would love to be writing $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 checks every quarter to these organizations. That's the goal.
Yeah, which would be even awesome. But what you're doing now is, I think, just as awesome. So
thank you. It's been fun. It's been such a great project. I've met a lot of great people, and I love doing the work, and I love tabling, because when tabling at these Pride events, I've done 2 Pride events so far. So next week will be my 3rd. And it allows me to talk to other people and connect to other LGBT youth and other parents of LGBT youth. And that is my favorite part, is just to kind of tell about the project and learn their stories. And and what I'll say about wearing shirts that say very proud ally statements, that say, most of our shirts obviously say protect trans kids, or we have one that's one of the most popular that says protect trans lives. And what I love about it is wearing those shirts create the most beautiful conversations. I think that's my favorite part of the project, is actually wearing the product and having the conversation and letting the product lean into someone saying, what does that mean? And, when they really want to learn. And yes, I've gotten into some controversial conversations, just a couple, but for the most part, the ally statement resonates with an LGBT youth and they say thank you. And I love that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Yes, thank you.
To talk with me today. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Kate. And thanks for all you do. And thanks for your visibility and all that you do. And anytime I can help, I love to help the community.
All right, Transcasters, that's all we have for you this week. Thank you for listening, as always, to this week's episode of Transcaster Radio. Don't forget to tune in next week for another great episode. Until next time, love life, live authentically, and as always, rise up. Hey Transcasters, I want to tell you about an awesome company I've discovered. I'd Rather Be Naked is a positive mental health community clothing brand that's raising awareness for transgender protection across the globe. I don't know about you, but that's my goal. They do this while living openly and aware of the world. They're always choosing the adventure the universe has to offer, and they're staying aware and grateful of earthly beauties. There's a misconception with being naked, and I had this issue when I first read I'd Rather Be Naked. Nude is actually to be without clothes, and naked is to be open and vulnerable with yourself and the world around you. I just think that sounds amazing. So I want you to go check them out. You can join the conversation on the Facebook group page at I'd Rather Be Naked Compassionate Community Conversation. You can also follow them on Instagram at I'd Rather Be Naked Community to stay up to date. And you can also visit their website at www.I'dRatherBeNakedCommunity.com and grab your gear there. They've also given me a code for you all to get 10% off your first order. So if you go to I'dRatherBeNakedCommunity.com and in the discount code section put Transcaster Radio 10, you'll get 10% off your first order. So go check them out.